So I'm going to get this started now. All right. All right. So, hello, my name is John Goodwin. I'm the president of Galaxy Press. We published the L. Ron Hubbard Presents Rise to Future series, just having released volume 39. And as a publisher, I will shamelessly say, if you haven't gotten the book yet, please do so. If you've gotten it and love it, share it with anybody you can. That it's a really good book. And these really are the best of the best new writers and artists of science fiction and fantasy. Tonight's guest is Tim Powers. And as I mentioned a bit ago, please address any questions to Mr. Powers in the chat. I will select and pose the questions to him. While he attempts to field all questions, this may not be possible with the number of attendees in only 2 hours, but we're going to go for getting that all done in the next 2 hours. The event is also being broadcast on Facebook so that anybody there who's checking it out on Facebook will be able to see what's happening too, although they won't be able to participate. All attendees, please keep your microphones on mute. And a little bit more about Tim Powers now. Tim Powers' novels include The Drawing of the Dark, The Anubis Gates, winner of the Philip K. Dick Memorial Award, and The Pre-Apollo, Dinner at Deviant's Palace, winner of the Philip K. Dick Memorial Award, On Stranger Tides, The Stress of Her Regard, Last Call, winner of the World Fantasy Award, Expiration Date, Earthquake Weather, Declare, winner of the World Fantasy Award, 3 Days to Never, and Hide Me Among the Graves. The Manchester Guardian called Powers the best fantasy writer to appear in decades. And the Goodwin Herald agrees. Tim has taught at the Clarion Science Fiction Writers Workshop at Michigan State University 6 times and currently teaches the annual Writers of the Future Workshop. He has been involved with the contest since its early years, serving as one of the instructors along with Algis Budrus and Orson Scott Card at the very first official Writers of the Future Workshop in Sag Harbor. He was formally inducted as a judge in 1993. So welcome, Tim.
Thank you.
So before we get started here, anything you'd like to say at the get-go, just in terms of as a judge, as a fellow writer, as Tim Powers?
Oh, just that it's always fun getting lots of the stories to judge. In fact, 15 minutes ago, I was reading through the most recent batch of stories, and there's at least a couple that I think, yeah, wow, this is gonna get Nebula Hugo attention, and it's fun to be in and at the beginning of these things. So I can say, oh yeah, I read that way back when, before anybody else did.
Yeah, that's great. So it's I mean, it's real to me too. Just the number of reviews that are coming in right now just totally rave on these books here. That just, it's such a variety of stories and just serious class acts on the authors. It's amazing. So we'll get started with some of the different questions. Richard Ware wrote in, I'd love to know Tim's writing process: outline, loose, tight, none, and then?
I tend to outline a lot. When I find some area or idea that looks likely to be rich enough to sustain a story, I want to read as much as possible about it. Even if it's not a historical thing, I want to learn about the place it's happening, weather, everything possible. And I look at the results. I look at all the stuff I learn as kind of a pile of bricks and lumber in the yard. It's all good stuff, but I've got to assemble it now. And so I really do like to outline so that I know going in what's coming next, what's the big thing we're working up toward. I know a lot of great writers just work, as they say, from the seat of their pants. Better writers than me, Philip K. Dick, for example. But to me, it's like if I want to get to Los Angeles Airport, I don't just want to drive west, knowing that eventually I'll find it. I want to have a map.
That makes sense. And I remember talking to you, this was some years ago. You said you lay out these 3x5 cards on your floor in your living room. And one time you had them all laid out and somebody opened the front door and the wind gusted in and blew them all over the place and changed the sequence of your story or whatever.
Yeah. I don't always do that, but sometimes I like to write every event or bit of dialogue. Largely, this is to postpone actually getting to work, of course. I wouldn't say that if I thought I'd go any further, but I like to sometimes write out event, bit of dialogue, two people meeting, whatever constitutes bits of the story, and sometimes lay them out physically on the floor. So I can say, well, does this look better before he called his mother or after he called his mother? And I can lay it out both ways and say, oh, I like it before, after. I like it when he calls her after. And yeah, one time somebody walked through and stamped all over the floor and the cards went every which way. And after that person left, I kind of looked at the floor and thought, maybe he helped. Was this an improvement? I don't always get that detailed about putting a story together, but often it's very helpful. Often you can maximize an effect by choosing what events happen before it and what events can be postponed to happen after it. You want to sort of put any particularly powerful events in the best chronological setting.
Right. Now, one thing I'd like to address on my question, maybe it'll come up as well from somebody else. You have a very specific type of fantasy that you like to write, where you take a historical piece of something and there's a hole in there and you fill that hole. So talk about that process. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, I don't ordinarily set out deliberately to do it. It's just that I'll be reading some nonfiction just for fun and come across some anomaly, some kind of enigmatic detail. And I think, what was that? Why did he do that? Why did that happen? And in real life, of course, there's no answer except that he was drunk. He was crazy. It didn't mean anything. But I'll say, well, no, let's say it did mean something. What unrevealed motive might he have had, with which it's not irrational, it's entirely shrewd. Let me fix up the camera here. And so I tried, it's like a cold case detective. I try to figure out, well, what background story, which we aren't given, would make his behavior logical. And of course, I always tell myself, and it's got to be supernatural. I don't want some real world explanation. And of course, the true explanation is he was drunk, he was crazy. But I want to make the reader think, oh yeah, you know what? That kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
Also,
like
and I'm always
in front of the Walk of Fame, with that you had stolen.
Oh, right. In the Chinese theater on Hollywood Boulevard, there's, of course, the famous handprints and footprints of everybody, Mary Pickford, John Wayne. And during the 50s, Charlie Chaplin was suspected of being a communist, as everybody was in the 50s. And his stone was removed. And more recently, they thought, well, it's Charlie Chaplin. Come on, put the stone back where it belongs. But nobody knew where it went. It's lost. And so I thought, well, I'll figure out where it is. And I'll figure out why it was taken away. Also, I always want to firmly staple my stories at every scene to the real world.
Yeah.
I don't want people to say, oh, this is a alternate Los Angeles, alternate London. I think, no, it's the real one. It's the Los Angeles you you drive through. I just sort of superstitiously feel that that's a help toward getting over the speed bump of suspension of disbelief.
It works. It really does work.
Oh, thank you. I want at every possible point to make the readers subconsciously think this is the same Los Angeles that Raymond Chandler wrote about, not some sort of alternate.
Yeah. All right. So we'll go on there. So I'll let somebody else have a chance for a question. This is from Joe Benet. Question: as we intend to earn income from writing, what should we track as tax deductions? Booth fees for conventions we sell at, admission fees to those conventions, time spent writing, ink and printers?
Oh yeah, all of that. Yeah, if you're making a substantial enough segment of your income that, you know, well, obviously you're paying taxes on it. A whole lot of stuff is legitimately deductible. Books, like travel. Obviously, if you go to a convention, that's a business affair.
Research, you travel for research?
Yeah, not as much as some people. I've never like flown to a place simply for research, but if I can drive to it within a day, I'll do it.
Right.
San Francisco, Las Vegas, LA is right next door. One advantage writers have now, which almost strikes me as cheating, is Google Maps and YouTube, because you can just about entirely walk through any place on Earth. All you miss is sounds and smells. So there goes a travel deduction. Well, I suppose you can write off what you're paying for internet, but you definitely. I know somebody who, if he wants to go to Hawaii, for example, just to visit friends, will make sure to write a story set in Hawaii, so that trip becomes a tax deduction.
I guess that's a solution to visit Hawaii. So I think hopefully we answer your question, Patricia. How do you reconcile the universes of your stories with the real world, with what we talked about? And moving on from there, we have, is your process different when writing short stories as opposed to novels? This is from Eric Stallsworth.
Yes. For one thing, I don't devote as much time to research for a short story just because, well, because it's not economical, and because a short story doesn't require the kind of breadth and depth of research that a novel requires. And yeah, of course, you find comparing short stories and novels, you have a whole lot less elbow room in short stories. Every event has to be propelling the main question. You don't really have room for subplots or as much colorful travel, for example. Travel is real good in a novel, but you can't spend 25% of a short story having people, I don't know, riding horses across the plains or sailing a ship, you know, across the Atlantic Ocean or something. I suspect that, I've never checked, but I suspect that even style is different with short stories. I suspect that sentences and paragraphs are shorter. I've never actually checked, but it seems likely.
Okay, good. And I have a question here also from Pierre Alexander P.A. Sicart, where he's asked, what are you looking for in a Rise of the Future story? And what is most likely to put you off in a Rise of the Future story?
Good question. For one thing, my preferences will differ from other judges.
Right.
I'm only one facet of a sort of big entity that makes the decisions. But I personally don't like present tense stories. There are exceptions. In fact, two recent Writers of the Future stories. One I just finished this morning, and one a few months ago, in which the narrator is a special case, has Alzheimer's disease, for example, so that the thoughts are disconnected and there really isn't any plausibility in saying it was the same person I met last Tuesday outside the candy store. That sort of memory wouldn't be admissible in that context. And another one was an AI. And so in those cases, it was not only believable, but essential that the stories be told in present tense. But in nearly all cases, it's a distancing thing. Present tense generally sounds like you're talking about a story rather than telling a story. Newspaper headlines are always in present tense. You know, Congress approves the bill. And then if you want the story, you read the story, which is in past tense. The headline was simply talking about the story. So there's a kind of a, in spite of the claim that it's more immediate, there's kind of a step back from immediacy in present tense narration. So that's one prejudice of mine. I get a little, frankly, tired of generic pseudo-Tolkien, Dark Lords, medieval setting, magic swords. I have a kind of a speed bump to get over with those. If it's real good, okay, I'll go with it. But I do have a speed bump in the way. I'm always suspicious of stories that are, say 15 or 20,000 words. I think, I wonder if you needed all that. I wonder if all those words were really called for. I wonder if this is as streamlined as it could be. Now, maybe it is. Maybe I'll read it and think, yeah, you needed all those words, all right. But yeah, there's three of my prejudices.
Okay. And what you're looking for, what you actually like?
Yeah, good point. I like stories that have lots of sensory details. I want to be placed in the setting. I want to sort of vicariously experience what the characters are experiencing. I don't want to be told the man got into a car and went to a restaurant and ordered a drink and a meal. Those are not nouns. Those are gray blurs. What's a default man, default car, default drink? Good Lord, what is a default drink? You know, I don't know whether it's a beer and a shot or some kind of thing with plastic monkeys and parasols all over it. So I like to be shown the milieu, and I like to be able to hear it and smell it.
Good. Good. That's great. Thank you. This is from James Crofts. Which character that you've written was the most difficult to write of yours?
Good question. Well, I think a character in Earthquake Weather, Cody Plumtree. She was a multiple personality, and at different triggers, she would shift from this person to that person internally. And so it was tricky to have that happen because there's no use having her be a multiple personality if she doesn't switch sometimes. But it was tricky having her knowing when to have her switch and what would her opinion have been 5 minutes ago in this situation versus this new personality's impression of things now. So yeah, a multiple personality was kind of a hard character to write. Another one was a character in 3 Days to Never who was blind, but was able to sort of telepathically see through the eyes of anyone within, say, a couple of 100 feet of her. So she could zap to this person and look through his eyes, and then as it's switching from one remote camera to another, zap over here and look through that person's eyes. Again, it was tricky to figure out how to divvy her attention out.
Good. All right, this is a question from Guy Arthur Simpson. I'm a huge admirer of your skill in presenting a psychic dimension as one more natural element of our familiar world, one that is not always apparent, but always there or latent. The way you make occult phenomena subject to natural constraints in a setting of urban realism makes them profoundly believable. What is it about this presentation of mythic forces that such fiction is saying about reality?
Well, I think everybody, even, mainstream normal people, has a weakness for superstition, mythology, supernatural phenomena. I've known people who say, well, I'm not afraid of ghosts or, vampires. I'm afraid of nuclear war and urban gangs. And I always think, yeah, but, you say that now. There's a lot of people around. It's noon. But I know if that person was alone in an old house at 3 a.m. and something was dragging downstairs, their first thought is not going to be, I bet that's an urban gang member. They're going to know exactly what it is. It's a werewolf. So I always think it's a fairly natural progression to lead readers from the tangibly real world to forces and implications behind the surface, which is another advantage of using the real world, because they think, well, that's real, a 7-Eleven, a Chevy, Marlboro box. And so if you take them with a one further step into supernatural stuff, I don't think there's a whole lot of resistance in people's minds, at least not in the bottom halves of their minds.
Okay, good. So Darren Lippman asks, what's your best advice for someone looking to level up their writing? For example, consistently getting honorable mentions in Wolf and wanting to place higher.
Yeah, well, the first thing I think of is, it's probably redundant, but read a whole lot, and not just in the field you're writing in. If you're writing science fiction and fantasy, yes, be familiar with that, but also read very widely in mystery, suspense, mainstream, plays, poetry, history, nonfiction. The more broad your reading footprint is, or toolbox or whatever, the more familiarity you're going to have with the language. There's a lot of narration styles you'll find in nonfiction that will prove to be useful in your fiction writing. Poetry, reading drama, Tennessee Williams, George Bernard Shaw, will give you a lot of instinctive familiarity with different kinds of dialogue. The problem with simply being very familiar with the field you want to write in, science fiction, fantasy, say, And I'm sure the person who asked the question does read more widely than that. But if you mainly read science fiction and fantasy, inevitably, it's going to be derivative. There's nothing else for it to be but derivative. So the more widely you've read among the broadest possible spectrum, I think the richer your content and your style is going to be.
Good. Now, one thing I'm going to make a little plug at this point too, to answer your question, Darren, and anybody else on this as well. We created about 3 years ago a free Writers of the Future online writing workshop, of which Tim did several videos. Orson Scott Card did several videos, as did David Farland. And in there, we also have, I think, about a dozen or so essays from L. Ron Hubbard. Now, the contest itself, Writers of the Future, was created by L. Ron Hubbard in 1983 to provide that launching pad for aspiring writers. Because of success, it was expanded to Illustrators of the Future 5 years later. And Mr. Hubbard had a long history of helping the aspiring writer, and he wrote a lot of essays which were published in the writers' journals back in the 30s and 40s. And I know, Tim, we've done a few podcasts on different essays that he wrote that are taught in the writer workshop. But one thing too is there are certain basics of writing which don't go away. You know, there's the language evolves, but some of the basic tools of writing still hold true from, you know, those authors that became the creators of what we now know as the golden age of science fiction, which then it wasn't. The thing that L. Ron Hubbard said was at a time period where it was creatively, it was exploding creativity. All these new things were taking off. It was no longer the ray guns and gadgets and robots. People were being entered into science fiction, and it was, you know, things were happening, different new, you know, new different ideas were coming into, and it wasn't just the same old trope. They were creating now what we now say are, well, yeah, that's already been done before. Yeah, these are the guys that created that. So this online writing workshop has these essays and these videos from these three judges, which are highly recommended to be able to give you some extra bandwidth on what you're doing when writing. I mean, that was the purpose. That was to help. And some people have commented over the last couple of years a major increase of honorable mentions in the results that come out every quarter. Dave Farland said for him it was so amazingly noticeable, the quality of stories that came up after we released that course, just because people had some more of the basics, what works in writing short fiction. So I highly recommend that if you're not taking it before, like I said, it's free. You go to riseofthefuture.com. You can enter the course. If you've done it before, you can do it again. You can go back as many times as you want to. You're not locked out of it once you've done it. We will be adding some more videos in there. We've recorded recently a Nadia Corfor, Orson Scott, Jody Lynn Nye, Kevin Anderson, and one more, Robert J. Sawyer. So we got 4 more videos that will be coming up in the next several months that will add to those that were already done. Anyway, so I wanted to put that plug in there because that's also, I think, important. If you want to say anything else about that, Tim, too, you can, because you're one of the key people in it.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I think those Hubbard essays, I think of the one on suspense, one on research, one on how to just come up with stories from scratch.
Magic out of a hat, that one there.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the search for research. Those are constant. The principles he gives in those essays are always true. Homer, Shakespeare would have agreed with those principles. And I think there's value in looking at those basics because they can help be an antidote to whatever this year's trends happen to be. I always hate to see stories that were obviously written by somebody who thought, what's hot right now? I should find out what's selling today, especially, and write that. And I think, well, A, it's going to be derivative, and B, by the time it's published, that stuff won't be trendy anymore. But the principles Hubbard put out in those essays are always, they always work.
Right, thank you. So this is a question now from Stephanie Smith. As a writer, who likely looks at other people's writing often? How do you personally identify good writing? What makes someone's writing stand out to you? Also, are there any common qualities of bad writing you feel you see often?
Okay. One thing I want from stuff I'm reading is I want to forget that I'm sitting in a chair reading a book. I want to really get immersed in the story. I want pretty quickly, I want to see that there's something anomalous going on in this fictional setting situation. And I want to see the wheels start turning right away. I don't want like explosions and car crashes in the first page, but I want the impression that, something big and apparently bigger than I had thought is going on. I don't want to be aware of the writer. I don't, when I'm reading, want to be thinking, I don't want to be hearing the writer's voice behind the description. I want, while I'm reading a story, to completely forget that there is a writer. And of course, as I said, I want tangibility. I want immersion. And some of my favorite writers are, well, I mentioned Raymond Chandler, John D. MacDonald, Kingsley Amis, Dick Francis. Those are all mainstream. But in our field, I'd say Fritz Leiber, Robert Silverberg, let's see, etc. Theodore Sturgeon, Philip K. Dick, who all give you intriguing stuff right from the start and place you firmly in the situation of the story.
Right. She also asked, I want to apply to a fiction MFA program this October, and I'm so nervous. Would love some advice from a professional.
Advice about going into an MFA program?
That's what I'm understanding the question to be.
Well, I would say be skeptical. In my experience, it's too often the case, and I'm probably a prejudiced old guy, but it's too often the case that creative writing teachers in universities only secondarily consider the factors that make a story saleable. They might be more concerned with what your theme is, or innovative narration, and they might be skeptical altogether of commercial fiction. So I would keep one foot firmly in your favorite writing, your favorite writers, and listen politely to the theories the instructor might have.
Kevin Anderson's created a master's program that he teaches, and on how to become, all aspects of publishing.
Well, actually, yeah. In fact, I think Kevin's points he makes are how to be a professional, how to expand your readership, promote your writing. And those are all certainly valuable. I should pay more attention to those things myself. But yeah, I never did get an MFA, so I'm skeptical of them since I know very little about them. But I would think of something Damon Knight said once. He said that Henry Kuttner learned something in a very hard school that you don't get from reading Henry James. Henry Kuttner, of course, being one of the great science fiction pulp writers who learned his craft from bad-tempered editors. You want to be sure you're meshed with the real world of publishing, which is, by extension, the real world of readership.
Good, thank you. This is a question from Robbie Riley. Thank you for doing this. We love it. First question for me, as someone who has accomplished so much and won so many accolades, do you ever get tired of hearing yourself introduced with such praise, or does it never get old?
It doesn't get old.
Okay.
Yeah, I always say, all right, go on, John. Don't let me interrupt you. Yes, carry on.
Okay, good. So this is from Jean-Paul Garnier, who's he's a bookstore owner. So we love bookstore owners. When outlining, do you work linearly or do you figure out the ending and work backwards? How important is deciding on structure in advance? You've partly answered that, but the beginning to end part you didn't.
Yeah, I sort of have the flavor of the book in mind. I think a book about I don't know, pirates in the Caribbean with voodoo and, you know, sword fights, sea battles. That's sort of a general flavor of a book. And then as I do research and think of things that ought to be part of it, it's almost like bubbles popping up. The ending might occur to me before other bits, but there's no real precedence. I'll think, well, you got to have a scene like this. And, oh, a scene like this would be a lot of fun. And eventually I'll arrange them and one of them will turn out to be something I want to amplify extensively to make, you know, the big ending. But they don't really occur chronologically or ending first. They kind of pop up here and there.
Okay, good. And another one from Neil Citron. When judging for Wolf, is there a core set of elements that you look for in the many submissions you grade? It's a bit different than the earlier question. So it's just, do you have a, like, I look for these 10 criteria, or these are 5 points I go through when judging on, like, originality and sentence structure and no typos and blah, 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 anything like that.
Well, I don't care about typos. I figure we all do that. And editors will fix that. Though bad grammar is a different thing. I kind of assume bad grammar would get through to the point where I would see the story. Somebody would have eliminated that several stages back. But no, I want an intriguing problem. I don't want it to just be the Dark Lord is gonna destroy my village unless I can find the magic sword. That is not an intriguing problem. Take that as a challenge. Maybe it could be. I bet somebody could make that an intriguing challenge. But ideally, I want a situation where I think, oh wow, yeah, that's kind of cool. What's going on there? But I really try not to, like I said, I have a prejudice against present tense stories and pseudo Tolkien. I try not to let those stop me. I try to, you know, okay, it's pseudo Tolkien. Go ahead and read it. Maybe it'll surprise you. And often it does surprise me. But I would say, if I had to pick one thing, I would say intriguing problem.
Good, good, thank you. Just as a comment from an earlier thing you made about deductions, animation pioneer Ray Harryhausen wanted to go to Italy, hence push for 20 million miles to Earth to be set there.
Right.
Yeah. This is from Afsane Alizadigan. Sorry if I butchered your name. Do you ever write in chunks and then connect that chunks? How do you make the connection parts as interesting as the other parts?
No, I don't think I do write in like this brick and then this brick. I think it's well, there's always the shift from one scene to another. at least, and you do hope this scene was interesting, and you hope the next scene was interesting. So yeah, how do you fill the gap? Okay, good question. If it's a gap of any extent, more than just he hangs up the phone and leaves the party and gets in his car and goes somewhere else. If it's a gap of any extent, I would try to make the gap itself interesting. I read somewhere that every scene should have more than one thing going on. For the sake of the plot, a scene has to say, show us them opening the safe and pulling out the, enchanted tiara. Okay, the scene has to provide that, but don't have the scene only provide that. Have other things going on at the same time. One character, I don't know, has got contrary motivations, or outside there's a bridge being torn down that they're going to need to cross very shortly, if it hasn't been torn down yet. But have several things happening, several concerns at work in any scene. And I would try to do that in the filler between two scenes, the sort of the mortar between the bricks. I would try to have the mortar itself be full of glass chips and bits of mirror. Yeah.
Cool. All right. From Guy Arthur Simpson, greetings from the mountains in Spain. Here it's 4 a.m. on July 8th, which means you are 7 hours behind. We already know what's happened. What role does time play in your imagined worlds, and what does that mean?
Well, just in any story of any chronological extent, of course, you've got to deal with duration and how do you handle a gap of 2 weeks? How do you say 2 weeks later? In a movie, of course, they can just have on the screen 2 weeks later. But of course, in our stuff, in science fiction and fantasy, time is not simply the conveyor belt that it is in mainstream fiction. There's always the possibility of kinks, derailments, looping back on itself, running backwards, which could ultimately, of course, you could be dealing with time travel, which carries all its own paradoxes, which have to be worked out. So yeah, I think one of the fun things about science fiction and fantasy is, even if you're not doing time travel as such, time is still kind of fluid. You can have bits repeat, little rerun bits, or flashes of precognition. It's a lot more elastic in our field than it is in mainstream, and that, therefore, to say that it's an opportunity for getting characters into problems that real life doesn't provide.
Okay, thank you. Do you ever get intimidated or scared? This is from Trish Henry. Do you ever get intimidated or scared when writing or planning a book or story? If so, what might you do to overcome?
Oh, yeah. Anytime I start a book, I sit at the keyboard and I think, okay, I've done the research, I've plotted the book, and I think, okay, Powers, you're about to write the first sentence of the project that is going to occupy you for at least the next year and a half. And I think, I can't do it. No, forget it. And so I have to kind of trick myself into starting. Very often I'll say, okay, take it easy. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. Look, we won't start the book today. I just want you to write 10 opening sentences. This is practice. We're not going to use them. You write me 10 opening sentences, we'll delete them and have lunch. I think, okay, I can do that. So I'll write 10 opening sentences. And then I say, okay, well, we'll have lunch soon, but now I want you to take 3 of those opening sentences make them into paragraphs. Or if they're dialogue, give me 5 or 6 lines of dialogue added to that for 3 of them. And I'll do that. And I think, now we're going to delete it and then go have lunch. But now I want you to take one of those extended bits, expand it to a page and a half, and then we'll delete it and have lunch. So I do that. And then I say, I was tricking you. That's real. You've actually started the book. That's the beginning of your book. And I think, wow, who knew? I literally do this. I mean, often I'll go 5 more pages before I'm convinced that it really is the beginning of the book. Before I really do decide, no, I guess I won't delete it. I guess this really is the start. But yeah, it's like trying to push start a car. The initial push, it seems impossible. So I like to trick myself with ways to get a bit of a slope working to get me started.
Good. That's a good answer there. Thank you. This is from Andriana Veach. When conducting research for your stories, how do you keep track of it? 3-ring binder, cards, Google Docs? How do you remember it all?
I make files. I'll make a file, for example, for one story that had to do with espionage. I had a file on this one character, a file on British Secret Service, which included history and any nice, lots of page numbers and websites. So I'll make a bunch of files.
Are these digital files or printed?
Well, these days, computer.
Okay.
Word files. And I'll try to cross-reference them extensively. And when I'm reading a research book, I always wind up making a sort of, if you can see all that, a sort of customized index on the front flyleaves, because the things I want to look up, page numbers I want to remember, are not the ones that were important to the person who made the official index book. So yeah, I try as much as possible to get a lot of stuff written down, or at least websites and page numbers, and try to get it cross-referenced or organized, all the things about, I don't know, Victorian shoelaces in this file. And at the beginning of, if I've got a file, at the beginning of a section on, for example, in one, it was Arab clothing. At the beginning of my bunch of notes about Arab clothing, I'll put Arab clothing, Arab dress, Arab costumes, so that no matter what phrase I use when I go searching for that, I'll be led there. Every possible search term will lead me to the same place. Also, I sometimes, if I've found some very valuable book, you know, oh, this is a lot of good stuff in here that I need to be aware of, I'll buy the Kindle book, because with Kindle I can do a search. With a Kindle book, I can say, where's that bit he mentioned? Flintlock guns. I can do a search for flintlock in a Kindle book, which I can't do in a paper book. So even though I've got the paper book, I'll get a Kindle just for that search option.
Good. Good. Thank you. And this is from Elizabeth Koo. What are your tips on brevity? How does one create exemplary sensory details but not go overboard?
Good point. Good point. Yeah. Well, I'm going to repeat myself a little bit here if people have seen the workshop video. But yeah, you want to give smells. What's the light source? You know, is it carpet or marble underfoot? Is he wearing corduroy or a swimming suit? You know, you want to give all those details. But obviously, yeah, you don't want to stop the action in order to describe, you know, the front of the building. As much as possible, have those details be part of the plot. or part of the action. If somebody's being pursued across a square, you can mention scuffing on cobblestones or slipping on rain-wet marble. If there's gunshots, you can mention the way the sound echoes in the arches of the building. It might be hard to see shadows if the day is very overcast. It might be hard to hear what people are shouting if there's a truck backing up going beep, beep, beep. And I'm not going to remember right now who this author is, but I mentioned it in the video. If you have to describe something extensive like architecture of a very weird Gorman Gast type building, or alien anatomy, or a weird political system, or I don't know, any very intricate thing, either a physical thing or something like a system of government, have it be broken and need to be fixed. That way, your description of that thing, whatever it is your story. Your story requires an extensive description of whatever it is. But yeah, generally speaking, have those details impinge on the character. It's easy enough to say, you know, he's gasping in the gasoline reeking breeze instead of just in the breeze. Good examples are Robert Heinlein actually was very good at putting a character into a science fictional situation, very different from our here and now, but by just little asides convey to you a whole lot about it without interrupting the action. A famous example is he rang the doorbell and the door dilated and he stepped through. Obviously, that's not here and now. Doors don't dilate to let us through here and now. But it was a tossed off detail that conveyed a lot. I hope people have read Heinlein. Good. I see Eric has.
Yes. Okay, good. So James Crofts, thanks, Tim. I'm here with my two boys. They both like to write stories too. They have both finished stories and are working on the next one. So there you go. That's great, James. Robbie Riley, question for Tim. Do you ever write a character very loosely based on someone in your own life and they figured it out?
Oh, no, not that they figured it out. Well, no, that's not true. In one of my books, I had an assassin. And somebody asked me, was that based on me? And I thought, yeah. But I said, no, what are you talking about? No, not a bit. I don't know what you're talking about. But yeah, inevitably, you'll be writing a character and you'll think, this is sort of like my pal so-and-so. And after that has occurred to you, I wouldn't dismiss it. I'd think, okay, well, provisionally, with some obvious necessary adjustments, let's sort of think of that character as my friend so-and-so. The character will, of course, deviate from your friend, but if you start with that sort of silhouette, it kind of helps to make the character a little bit more three-dimensional. Silhouette versus three-dimensional. That doesn't make sense, but you know what I mean.
Exactly. Shadow Man versus three-dimensional.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Elizabeth Koo to everyone. Okay, it is interesting seeing how humans naturally presume supernatural phenomena. That's true. Like we gave your examples of the noise on a stairwell at 3 o'clock in the morning. Do you have any cats? If so, how many? This is from Candace Lyle.
Sorry, what was that?
Do you have any cats? If so, how many? This is
Cats, yes. I'm surprised none have come through here. There's one on the windowsill out there. Many. How many cats we have is many. I don't know, 15?
they all have names, or they just kind of like come
Oh
and
yeah, they've got well, the trouble is where we live is kind of rural and there's a nation of feral cats. And so it always happens that you look out and you think, uh-oh, kittens in the tool shed. And at first you think, well, we should leave them with their mother, but you can't. They get eye infections and kittens, and so we catch them and get them fixed, and then you think, well, we'll find a good home for them. Except after we've named them, they kind of stick around.
Okay, good. Jean-Paul Garnier, how important do you find prosody in fiction?
How important what is?
Prosody, Prosody.
Oh, right. Well, I take that basically to mean style.
Now, I'm just going to read the definition for people who don't know. Prosody is or prosody, the patterns of rhythm and sound used in poetry. The translator is not obliged to reproduce the prosody of the original. The theory or study of the patterns or stress of intonation in a language.
All right. Well, actually, I think it is important. I know some people advise reading what you've written out loud so that your ear sort of gets the meter and rhythm of it. I like to think I do that in my head. It's out loud, but it's in my head. Certainly, especially reading other people rather than your own work, you do notice a kind of clunky style, like a chain where the links are too big and it's kind of clunk, clunk, clunk. Ideally, you want to have a variety of sentence lengths, rhythms, but I really think that almost has to take care of itself. I think familiarity with poetry and various different sorts of writers. I think of somebody like Elmore Leonard at one hand for very direct boom, boom, boom prose. Over here, maybe Jack Vance or Clark Ashton Smith or James Branch Cabell. Ideally, you're familiar with a whole lot of different styles of prosody. Ordinarily, though, I don't think it's something you'd be able to be aware of. I know in one story I wrote, I had a character who spoke in iambics, da-dum, 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 da-dum. And I wrote the whole story with that character consistently. His speech went out like this in first draft. When I went over the first draft, I found that a lot of that worked fine, but some of it just sounded goofy since I had forced it into the iambic pattern. And so I changed those bits. So yeah, it's important, but I think you got to have read enough so that it will become instinctive.
Yeah, you had your earlier comment. You don't want to be hearing the author. You want to be able to just be immersed in the story.
Right.
Yeah. And I've gotten several people here saying they love listening to you talk about writing. So this is great.
Bless their hearts.
Yes. And somebody also put in 2 bits for the Rise to Future podcast as well. And by the way, for anybody that hasn't, and I'll put the link in here before this is over, right now in the month of July is voting for the People's Choice Podcast Awards. And if you go to podcastawards.com, I'm just putting a link right here. you can find Writers of the Future, and I've got in the various categories there of art and storyteller drama and art, storyteller drama, and one more category. I forget what it is right now, but those are categories that's listed. And if you could please vote for that, it'd be great. I've been a finalist 3 times, and I'd love to be able to make it to a win this year. We're over between 2 and 2.5 million listens per episode right now, so it's going well. So anyway, so yeah, PA, I just put the link in there, Podcast Awards, without the E there. So I'll do it again. But it's yeah, podcastawards.com. You just, it's free to enter, and you can just go in there and nominate the Rise of Future podcast. All right, so here we go. Now we go into Bro Booher. Do you ever have characters looking for a story where you've thought up a character but have no story for them yet?
Not for more than a half a page. I keep a file where I just write down interesting bits and idea fragments and quotes from interesting people. And a lot of times in that file, I'll start a story because I'll think of an interesting first line. And so I'll write the line and write several more, and I have no idea where it's going or who these people are. And those fragments just sit in that file. Ideally, eventually I'll read one of them and think, I bet you could make something of that. Fix it up, put some little clues in here and there. But anytime I actually sit down to write a story, I pretty well know who they are and where they're going. Generally, I know quite a bit about who they are and where they're going.
Because you've done the research first?
And the plotting, yeah. As I say, it's like driving to the airport. I mean, you could just take off going west and eventually get to LAX, but I like to have a map, and I like the map not simply to be the most direct route, but the most scenic route. But I don't want any of it to be random.
Good.
I hate cutting bits. I know some people who will, very good writers, who will take 2 characters, put them in a car, have them talk, and let the dialogue go where it wants to go. And after a couple pages, the writer will think, oh, it's a mother and daughter. Huh. I wonder where they're going. Write some more dialogue. Oh, they're coming home from a funeral. I wonder who was dead. And the writer is discovering it as they go. But I could never do that. I've said somewhere that if I let my characters develop the story, they'd all sleep till noon and be drunk by sundown. and the only action would be them getting evicted and can't start their junky cars.
That's kind of lame. Okay, good. So now I just have a question too on this. Have you ever start writing a story and then realize once you're into it that the story actually started on page 40 and then just lose the first 40 pages?
Yeah. If it's a story, I hope I didn't get up to page 40 before I figured that out.
But anyway, you're well into it before you realize this is where the story actually starts now.
Yes. In fact, I think that happens a whole lot to a whole lot of writers.
Yeah.
I think Hemingway said once that any story can be improved by throwing away the first 4 pages and letting the next complete sentence be the first line of the story. And for novels, it's in principle, a novel is improved by throwing away chapter 1 and letting chapter 2 be the first chapter of the book. And you think, well, wait, what about all the stuff I told the reader in that first chapter? Well, you'll be able to salt it in later. Now, obviously, that's not always true. It's probably seldom true, but it's a good principle to be aware of, that a lot of times your first several pages at least is sort of you just sort of settling in your chair and flexing your fingers. In fact, my very first novel I wrote when I was 23, I showed it to a friend of mine. I showed him the first several chapters, and he read the first 10,000 words and said, throw it in the trash and start when the story starts. Luckily, I did. It seemed kind of extravagant, but luckily, I did what he said, and I threw away the first 10,000 words, and the book got published. But I needed not only to be told that, but to actually enact it in order to really learn it.
Oh, good. Okay. This is from Robbie Riley. Do you have a preference for point of view in the narrator?
I don't think so. Third person is probably the standard. But certainly I can think of a lot of very good first person stories. I don't know if anybody's read any of the Travis McGee stories by John D. McDonald. I don't see any nodding heads. Okay, good. Richard Ware, good. The only handicap with first person narration is that your character has to be everywhere that things happen. Third person, you can show your character over here doing this, and then you can switch to a camera across town in which the kidnappers are locking the hostage into, the meat locker. But with first person, your narrator has to be everywhere. I remember a friend of mine proposed an outline after having published several novels, proposed an outline to Judy Lynn Del Rey at Del Rey Books. And it was first person. And she said, no, don't do it. And she said, don't do first person. And he said, why not? And she said, you're not good enough yet. It is a challenge. I've only done it in, here's a cat. Say hello to everybody there. I've done first person in short stories. I've never done it in a whole novel.
Got it. Okay. And then Richard Ware, I love Robert Silverberg's Roma Eterna. Darren Lipman, thank you very much for answering my question. I'm looking forward to the expanded workshop videos. PA Sikart, Fritz Lieber was nominated for the Hugo for short stories so many times before he actually won. Let's see, again from PA, how do you get in the mood for writing? I mean, your writing space, and if you have any rituals such as a cup of tea that tells your subconscious the writing has begun.
Yeah. Aldous Budrys said one time that most writers would rather do anything today than write. And I find that's true of me. I always think, oh, no, I got stuff. I've got a old book I'm reading. I just want to look at cat videos on YouTube. So I have to tell myself, no, first sit down and turn on, get into your Word file. Okay, now go ahead and watch a cat video, take a break. Okay, now come back. Read what you wrote during the last couple of days up to the point where you left off. Okay, I have to kind of goad myself at every step. Sit down, turn on the computer, get into Word, get into your file, get to the point you're supposed to be at in your file. I have to very mechanically sort of say, go on, do it. Don't mess with that old Lovecraft paperback lying on the floor over there. That's not your business right now. Really, I find a lot of value in guilt and fear. I like to tell myself, what right do you have to be using up oxygen that somebody else could use? Get busy. Just, read what you wrote before and now continue. In fact, to facilitate that, to make it easier to start in the morning or evening or whatever, I like to finish a day's work. Never finish a day's work with the end of a chapter, because then the next day getting moving again is too much like push starting a car. I like to end in the middle of a scene, in the middle of a dialogue exchange, ideally in the middle of a sentence, so that all I've got to do next day in order to resume is complete a sentence. I like to end with, he looked up and, okay, save it, close it down. Next morning, I read up to where I left off, and it's, he looked up and I think, oh, all I got to do is finish the sentence. Okay. And then I'm rolling. I've got the car moving.
Good. Thank you. How do you get yourself to finish something to overcome disappointment in the piece of work during its process and not get hung up on the flaws in the moment?
Well, it helps to have done it before. Ideally, you've written stories before and come to that inevitable point where you look at what you've written and you think, oh my God, it's all stupid. It's a complete waste of time. I may as well have been making cathedral replicas out of popsicle sticks. You have to remember that this is inevitable. It always happens. There's never been a book written, Huckleberry Finn, in Great Expectations. There's never been a book written, I'm confident, in which halfway through the author didn't suddenly say, oh my God, this is no good at all. I have absolutely no skill. Or if maybe I did once, but obviously I don't anymore. Expect that. It will happen. And it's never true. I always have to tell myself, no, Powers, look, you always think your book is completely without any value when you're halfway through. And it never has turned out to be true. And then I think, I bet it is this time. I think, no, shut up. You always think that too. Just push on. So yeah, you have to simply tell yourself, look, what else of value can you ever hope to accomplish? Keep doing this. It's like crossing a desert or something. Keep putting one foot in front of another.
Good, thank you. Stephanie Smith, another question. What kind of elements or details do you prefer not to see in a short story that might be present in a full-length novel? If a short story is too long, what would be the first element or detail you encourage people to remove?
Well, that's a good question. I would think it would be difficult to try to encompass a big complex past of a character. I think for a short story, characters necessarily have to be a little bit, again, I wouldn't say this if I thought it would go any further, but I think for short stories, it's almost necessary that the character be a little bit shallow, a little bit three-dimensional. And I think trying to make a character be very fully developed novel type character in a short story would hamper a short story. A short story is sort of a stunt, while a novel you live in for a year or so. I don't think of anything else particularly, any particular like theme or anything.
If a
Maybe
short story was too long, was there something that you would, first element or detail you encourage people to remove to make it tighter? Besides the unnecessary adverbs?
I would say to sort of amplify, I would say extensive character development. I don't think in a short story you want to provide, or a reader wants to see, a whole lot of interior pondering and conflict, unless that's the whole story, unless there is no action or exterior enigma. But yeah, in a short story, I kind of think get to it. I don't need to know that much about your character.
Good. This is from Jason Akanaka. How do you feel about sad downer endings in short stories?
Yeah, they can be done very effectively, God knows. Obvious example is Flowers for Algernon. Very depressing ending, but a great story.
Yeah.
But I remember Norman Spinrad wrote sometime, he said, I don't want to leave my readers more depressed than they were when they picked up my story. And I think that's a good principle. I know when I was young, say college age, I think I had the attitude that a downer ending was more literary, that it was more likely to be literature if everybody winds up having a terrible time. These days, as a writer, I certainly would much rather leave the characters with at least the likelihood of some kind of upbeat conclusion.
Good. Good. Let's see. When writing, this is Neil Citron. When writing, is there a specific type of writing software you use, or is it plain on MS Word just fine?
It's just plain MS Word. It used to be Word Star back in the old DOS command days. Basically, all I want is something simple that I'm not aware of. I don't want anything more than give me this typeface, give me these margins, and now I don't want to have to think about you. So yeah, it's Word. All editors seem to be happy to take Word. Yeah, I just wanted to do its very simple task. Even Word, I'm sure, is capable of doing a whole lot of things, has a whole lot of features that I'm not aware of and I don't want. I just wanted to make something that looks like a typed manuscript.
Good. This is from Brett Buher. Do you ever have characters looking for a story where you thought up a character but have no story for them? Well, I already asked that, or it was already asked, one or the other. Sorry. A lot of comments. People are really liking listening to you, Tim. Do you think, this is from Guy Arthur Simpson, do you think sci-fi will become mainstream with the development of AI?
No. I think sci-fi is always going to be, by definition, that which is not yet doable. And in fact, really that which is not, in fact, ultimately plausible even. But I think I've read that already some online magazines are having to deal with manuscripts generated by Chat GBT. My brother teaches high school, and he says students turn in essays written by Chat GBT. I don't think any of us here need to worry that AIs are going to start writing fiction better than what we write. I mean, look at us, right?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely with Rise of Future, we're tracking with that. And we've actually changed the rules this year so that people were using Chat GPT. And of course, just by saying you can't do that, there's gonna be some people trying to game it and trying to say, aha, I did it. But it's just, it's not true with what we're trying, it's not fair with what we're trying to do here. We're trying to like provide for the future of science fiction. Fortunately, our judges are very well read, so they can tell gimmicks, and the quality of storytelling you now have in Rise of Future is such that having something that's just computer generated will be found out. And there are some tools you can use to check it out if you have a question on it. But the main thing on it is it's going to come up when a person comes to the Words Week in the workshop that they can't write. That'll show up very fast in the workshop that the person is incapable of writing.
Yeah, I don't think yet an AI can come up with a story that would really be what we call a good story, you know, really affective, effective story. Maybe 5 years from now, maybe 10 years from now, my favorite writer will be an AI. Because I mean, after all you care about is the story, the print on the page. But certainly AI is, and has for a long time been, a fruitful element to use in science fiction stories, at least all the way back to Budrus's Michaelmas and Heinlein's Moon is a Harsh Mistress.
Good. Let's see, we've got online workshop is fantastic. Okay. PA wrote again, I read several of your short stories, drunk. Definitely your characters would all end up drunk. So here we go from Robbie Riley. Do you think Rod Serling was having fun with this idea of characters going where they want with his TZ story, A World of His Own?
I think you could say that. I think you don't think so much of a TV show as the work of one writer, but I think even when Outer Limits was written by other people like Richard Matheson or Charles Beaumont, it was always sort of somehow Rod Serling's voice, and it was kind of a distinct world. If you were to see a Twilight Zone episode you had never seen before, with the beginning cut out, I think you'd still know it was a Twilight Zone episode. I'm not sure it was the best influence on our field.
But I know they get a lot of their material from pulps.
Yeah.
Because I spoke to some of the authors that, yeah, they definitely pulled from the pulps, some of those.
Well, yes. Yeah. In fact, a lot of times they simply adapted pulp stories, like that. The one where the evil kid is wishing everybody into the cornfield. You remember that one?
Yeah.
That was from a Jerome Bixby story. But yeah, as an influence, I don't think it'd be so good because it's filtered. You're getting it at second hand.
Yeah. Okay, good. From Elizabeth Koo. Characters don't always have to be likable, but I aim to make mine interesting. How do you create immersive characters, relatable or not? And what are your favorite types of characters?
Good question. Well, it's certainly true that characters don't have to be likable. I'm always kind of baffled when I see criticism that says, I didn't like any of these characters. I think, well, okay. I mean, you know, did you like the brothers Karamazov?
Hmm.
A lot of fascinating characters, very intriguing characters who get your curiosity up, are not all that identifiable with. I think ultimately you want, I'm thinking of novels here, you want many, you could almost say conflicting dimensions. Your protagonist should obviously not be perfect, should have some conflicting motivations and tastes, and intriguing ones. I'm thinking, okay, from our field, Paul Atreides, very intriguing character, but always, to my frustration, always trying to hold back from falling into the Messiah role. I always want to say, Paul, go for it, you know, take it all away, man. You want them to have intriguing quirks, which then your challenge is to make those consistent within one person. I always want to know for any character I write, what is the one thing this character would do anything to achieve? And at the same time, I want to know what that character would do anything to avoid facing. If you know those two things about a character, you're going to get some interesting sparks across the gap. And inevitably, the one thing the character would do anything to avoid facing is something that character is going to be faced with. You've promised that to the reader. So yeah, I think whether it's a good guy or a villain, admirable or despicable, you want to give them intriguing countercurrents within them. Also, it's a very good idea for a bad guy. Have them be very good at something. Piano, horseback riding. Here's another one. Say hi, kitty. Oh. God knows what, art. Because being good at something is admirable, and it's nice to stick some admirable characters into your villain along with their less than admirable qualities.
Great, thank you. This is from Robert Delaware. How long did it take you to get published initially? How much reading has you done at that point? I mentioned reading as you mentioned being widely read. Thanks for doing this.
Well, excuse me. There we go. I got my first rejection slip when I was 15 because F&SF magazine ran an editorial on how to submit stories. So I immediately wrote a story which was a retelling of a story in that same issue. And it got rejected right away. But I was kind of pleased. I thought, all right, a rejection slip. Hemingway got these. And I wrote a lot of short stories and beginnings of novels which went nowhere for many years. In fact, I kind of made a practice of that. I would write a first chapter or half of a first chapter and then abandon it. At one point when I was in college, I think I had written, it might have been 100,000 words of a novel. No plot, because I thought plots happened automatically. If you had enough action going on, you know, a plot would show up. But when I was 23, finally, after all that and a lot of rejection slips, a friend told me about a new publisher who had just started up and who had no backlist and who had very strict length requirements. And furthermore, who would give you a contract based on 3 chapters and an outline, which nobody does anymore. And so I wrote 3 chapters in an outline and got a contract, and that was my first novel. So I had got a lot of rejection slips by that time, all for short stories. This was the first time I had attempted to write a whole novel. Luckily, the way the editor set up the guidelines, they wanted an outline. And I think still to this day, agents and editors, if they say, don't send us a whole book, send us maybe 3 chapters in an outline. They won't give you a contract based on that, but they might say, okay, now let us see the whole book. This looks okay. Since I had to write an outline for it, I discovered that I had my plot laid out. And I thought, this was handy. I'm going to do that again, write outlines before I actually start. So I started writing outlines right from the start there. But yeah, a lot of rejection slips, reading very widely. I read a lot of stuff on how to write, how to plot. Damon Knight wrote a book called In Search of Wonder, which was book reviews, but his book reviews consisted of real good writing advice. And I don't know, right now, Stephen King has written a good book on writing. I've read it and found it valuable. But yeah, basically write a lot and get a lot of rejection slips. It's too bad they're not actually slips anymore. They're just rejection emails now.
Yeah. All right, Robbie Riley, how do you feel about characters with no names? For example, Hemingway's A Clean, Well-Lighted Place, the 2 main characters which do all talking are called Waiter and Waiter with a Wife.
I think that'll work in a short story, or a short scene. I mean, if Clean, Well-Lighted Place was a chapter of a novel, I think that would be fine. Waiter 1, Waiter 2, because they're not characters really. As I recall, it was just the old man sitting there stacking up the saucers as he's drinking. I forget what he's drinking. Absinthe, maybe. Inessential characters, sure, no name is fine. The guy with the red hat appeared again, this time behind me, pretending to read a newspaper. Okay. I don't think you could ever have an important character and not give him a name. Now, of course, probably people can think of lots of exceptions to that. Oh, yeah, Powers? Well, what about Hubbard's story Final Blackout, where a character was just known as the lieutenant? Okay, all right, that's an exception. But in general, no, give it a name and let me know what they look like too.
Good. All right, I'm still scrolling. A lot of people, I want him back. I want him back. And I had a few people comment that knife behind you and all the Coke cans. Someone said the Coke cans, that's vital fuel for Tim, but the knife, they didn't know about that one.
I don't know why it's there. I mean, this here is a little mini fairy tale book. This is all random junk. This happens to be where my computer is. I didn't choose this location.
Okay. This is from Jason Akanaka. Do you feel the secularization of society hurts or helps our stories?
Okay, secularization would be versus what? Traditional religion or supernatural context? I think that would be the opposite of secular. I think it hurts. I think it can't effectively separate us from our Jungian mystical cores, but I think it distances us from them. Secular, I don't want to say it's boring, but it's awfully two-dimensional. Like I've never been tempted to write a mainstream book. I always think, well, no, I want to use supernatural or, science fiction type stuff. And it's, well, then it won't be mainstream. I think, well, but readers do resonate to those things, fantasy, science fiction. Why shouldn't I use them? It's like somebody telling me, I want you to do a painting, but no color blue. I think, well, but people can see blue. Why can't I use blue? And people resonate to supernatural stuff. So why shouldn't I use it? So yeah, secular, if I'm understanding the meaning of it correctly, I think is a bit infinite, but a bit flat.
Yeah. It's interesting because I'm in the middle of reading The Hero with 1,000 Faces by Joseph Campbell right now.
Oh, yeah.
I'm getting prepared to interview Roger Christian. He's the guy that won the Oscar for Star Wars 1. I'm going to be interviewing next week and on the podcast. And we're going to compare, he's talking about how Star Wars was that formula, The Hero with 1,000 Faces. And he's the one that, he's won 2 Oscars, but we're going to talk about that with respect to Star Wars and Battlefield Earth, because that's one of his favorite books, how that happens. But that's very much, I'm amazed how much throughout history, it's the same formula. You change names and stuff like that, but it's the same formula.
Wizard of Oz, Hunger Games,
Yeah.
every story. I remember the first time somebody showed me Joseph Campbell's 12 Steps. I had just finished writing a book called Last Call, and I realized I had followed them precisely and in order. Just about any fairly dramatic, adventurous story you can think of turns out to touch most of Campbell's bases.
It's amazing. I was just like shocked. I'm shocked. I'm just fascinated in reading this book. Just like,
I mentioned Hunger Games and I forget what the other one was I mentioned, but virtually any adventure book, you've got the call to adventure, the initial reluctance, the consulting the wise old character. It's weird.
Yeah.
The human mind, that's the kind of story it thinks up and likes.
I know, it's amazing. Anyway, let's see. Here we go. Some more questions here. About 100 comments on your cats. Okay, good. I don't quite understand this from Eric Ferguson. What about TTOTS? Do you know what that would be?
What is it?
TTOTS?
TTOTS.
I'm not sure what that is.
I don't know what that is.
All right. I don't know either. So
I'm trying to think what that might be initials for.
yeah, well, we're still thinking much more comments on stuff. So people are just making all kinds of comments that you've sparked within them. There's all these other comments on it. Some PA said Neil Gaiman said he didn't want to read The Hero of 1,000 Faces for fear it would affect his writing.
Well, yeah, I know what he means. It's a natural thing to worry about. I would just write the story you find the sequence of events that strikes you as most effective. But it wouldn't hurt to look at Campbell's list. I mean, don't take it as a template that you have to follow or a stencil, but it's no harm being aware of it.
Definitely used to that formula too, just over the last, at least for the last several thousand years.
Yeah.
As readers or as appreciators of stories, that's a formula that's worked quite some time.
It just occurred to me Hamlet follows it.
Yeah.
With the ghost as the old advisor. Yeah, it's no harm being aware of it. And even if worst case happened and you did find, I'm simply following his rules. Well, it's the universal rules, you know?
Yeah.
Ah,
Good. And then one more question from PA, Mr. Powers. What was your favorite wolf story ever?
favorite what?
Rise to the Future story.
Oh, I won't remember the title of it, but um, you might remember it, John or
Yeah.
Emily. You know the way people have ever since Starship Troopers have written about these armor suits, sort of a big, fully weaponized metal suit that you can walk around in and jump and I don't know what, fire lasers and stuff. There was one story in which a guy is coming home again after wars and his daughter runs out to meet him and he's in his suit and comes clanking up. And at some point, you know, the daughter is happy to see him to the extent that she can see him since he's in this sort of weird suit of armor. And he happens to want to like hold her hand and opens his gauntlet and it's empty. And it becomes clear that the suit, he's dead. The suit working on his old memories and impulses has gone home for him and without him. And I thought that was damn nice. I wish I could remember who wrote it. I remember what he looked like. I remember him from the workshop.
Yeah, Michelle Diaz said it was called The Armor Embrace. I don't remember, but yeah, that was the name of it. That was,
Well, good work. Good work.
yeah, yes. Another question from Robbie Riley. Do you ever get asked about having Blade Runner, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, dedicated to you and your wife by Philip K. Dick?
Yeah, I'm very pleased with that.
That's cool, yeah.
Yeah, I met Philip K. Dick in 1972, and once I met my wife, the two of us knew him up till his death in 1982. And what he would do is every time a book, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, it's dedicated to me and my wife, but it was published in 1968 when I was 16 and my wife was like 11. What he would do is every time a book was reissued by a new publisher, he would put a new dedication on it. And if it was then republished again, he would again put a new dedication on it. So he died while our dedication was the most recent one on Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. I'm very pleased to have it.
Yeah, it was Doug's, it was somebody just pointed out just on the Armor Brace, just to finish it off, Doug Sousa was the author of that in volume 33.
Aha, very good.
Right, sorry, go back to your dedication, because it's, you know, by my saying, yeah, I know a guy that PK Dick dedicated his book to, like I can be, people can say, wow, I'm friends with John now because he knows someone who's had his book dedicated to him.
Yeah, it was very gratifying. I was very pleased. It's terrific show off value. If people mention, I mean, I won't bring it up, but if somebody says, oh, well, you know, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, I'll say, did you happen to notice who it was dedicated to? Go, I'll wait. Go look. But yeah, we knew him for his last 10 years. And just as an aside, he actually was not crazy. There's a sort of a caricature of him that is the default portrait of him in popular culture, that he was a drug-addled, hallucinating lunatic. Actually, he was very rational, very funny, very well-read, great friend.
That's awesome. So we're down to our last like 10 minutes here, everybody. So any other questions? I'm seeing lots of comments and I'm just rolling through here. But anybody has any last questions, you're welcome to ask, so let's see if there's anything else here. Someone asked earlier, do you have a writing group, or do you have a list of beta readers that you work with when you write your books?
No. I have two people who I guess would be beta readers. My wife is one, and another is a guy who ex-cop, but both of them are very well read and can make intelligent criticisms of a book of mine. But an important distinction, I think, is that neither of them are writers. I don't really want to know what another writer would tell me about a book I'm in the process of writing. I want to hear what a reader would say, such as my wife. She'll say things like, you led up to the scene like it was going to be big news, but then you just walked through it. Either get rid of that lead up or beef up the scene. The trouble is, a writer is going to tell me how they would have done it. I know at one time when I was in Clarion, Nalo Hopkinson, who was recently named Grand Master by SFWA, she had written a story, and I told her, oh, Nalo, listen, wait, you got the wrong ending. Here's the ending you should have. Your story calls for it. It's perfect. Here's your ending. And she said, thank you, but published it the way she had written it. And it occurred to me that I had told her how to make it a power story. And she didn't want to write a power story. She wanted to write a Hopkinson story. So yeah, writers groups, nah, I don't want to know what writers have to say about it.
Good, thank you. From Richard Ware, what do you think is a satisfying ending for yourself?
What is a what?
Satisfying ending.
Oh, well, I want all loose ends tied up. I want every question and enigma that has been raised in the course of the book to be settled, explained, dealt with. I do want the bad guys to be ideally exposed and humiliated and killed. Can't always work out, but ideally. Ideally, I want my protagonist to, with most of their limbs still intact, to be headed out toward what we can hope is a pleasant time. Aldous Budrys made a good point that at the end of your book, you've got the climax, the explosion, or the treacherous old dowager at the best rose competition has been exposed as a fraud. Whatever the climax is, macro or micro, you want another bit after. You want what he called validation, which is after the action has been settled, the conflicts are resolved in satisfying ways. You need a bit after where people say, wow, how about that? Or do the papers have anything about all that happened yesterday? Or how are you getting along with your prosthetic arm? Or something afterward to show that the previous stuff really did happen. And to emphasize the fact that unlike every previous chapter, your last chapter does not have strings sticking out of the forward end that need help. Every previous chapter had extenders sticking out of the downstream end. Your last chapter does not. Your last chapter, unlike all the others, does not say, yes, but what about? There are no more what abouts. And therefore, a little bit at the end where people kind of go, well, here's $10. You won the bet. Or Luke Skywalker gets a medal. or they get married, something to let us know that it's over now and it really did happen.
Good, good, thank you. And here's another one. Someone's asked, what about thoughts on incorporating chapters from a novel into a short story?
People have done it. Often it works the other way around. Somebody like, Philip K. Dick, Raymond Chandler, will write short stories and then incorporate them whole as chapters in a novel. Theodore Sturgeon did that with More Than Human. Originally, that was a novella, which he incorporated into a full-length novel. Great book, by the way, one of the best. A lot of times in an anthology, you'll see an excerpted chapter. Here's several short stories, and here's a chapter from so-and-so's upcoming novel. I never find it all that effective because it's just a chapter. There's wires sticking out of both ends that are not connected. If a chapter from a novel would work as an excerpted short story, it strikes me it must be an awfully episodic novel. But then there are such. If people have read Jack Vance's Dying Earth, I don't see any nodding heads. You guys ought to read Dying Earth. A lot of, especially in our field, novels consist of short stories that were later sort of welded together into a novel. Asimov's Foundation books were all originally short stories that he welded together. So yeah, I'm dicey about it.
Okay. So I think we've gone through our questions. Somebody made a comment that Patrick Rothfuss won Rise of the Future with a chapter. I'm on way to Levenshire, which is a chapter from his first book. But then when we asked him if we could republish, he said no, it was sufficiently changed in the novel. They didn't want to put it back out. It would confuse people.
Yeah, as I said, Chandler did that. Philip K. Dick did that. Yeah, you can. It works to take the short story and make it into a novel. I'm doubtful about pulling out a chapter.
Yeah, I'm about ready to. I'm in the middle of reading a book right now from one of our winners this year, Death and the Taxman. It's been novelized and.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I saw a notice of that.
Yeah, so he's doing something about halfway through it right now, and I'll be interviewing him next week on that. Anyway, so I'm opening up right now. We're going to open it up, Emily, so that everybody can then say hello and thank you, and we can inundate him with open up your video too. So
Merci, Tim.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks for the great workshop.
Thank you,
Great.
sir.
And well, thank you, and my cats. Thank you all.
Thank you,
And we'll go over it a bit later on, Tim, because I've had so many comments asking, we love him, we want him back. So we'll work out and see if what I have to do to get you to come back on again here.
I'd love to anytime.
Oh, good. Good, because it was definitely hit. And maybe
Right.
we'll do, which I've done also with Scott Card, is then this one is for all the people that finished online course. We'll do to you as well as open it up to aspiring writers in general to be able to listen to what you have to say, because this has been amazing. I really, really appreciate this, Tim.
It's been fun.
And once again, everybody, if you've not gotten volume 39 of Writers of the Future, please do so. There's amazing stories in there. These are who your favorite writers, like Tim Powers, have chosen as their favorite stories coming up. So they're really good stories. And then if you've listened to the Writers of the Future podcast, please go to Writers of the Future, go to podcastawards.com and vote for Writers of the Future podcast. And we talked about also the online writing workshop, of which Tim has several videos in there. So thank you all very much. And thank you very much, Tim. Good night,
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey,
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Domo arigato. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
I trust I'll see some of you again here and there.
No doubt.
No doubt. Absolutely.
Lost con, Tim, lost con.
Yes, say goodbye, say goodbye.
Okay, I'm going to sign off now. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much.